In previous chapters, we've looked at how we can use delays to create patterns. In other words, enhancing the kind of rhythmic complexity of the parts that we've written for our piece. But all of those examples have either been in a kind of dance music or pop music context. What we're going to do here is to see that that's true if you want to write music for picture as well. So this is a more kind of cinematic cue using strings and percussion, but we're going to see that actually delay can play a really important role in music like that as well. Here's how the track sounds without any delay at all. Okay, so what we've got here are some blue regions up here at the top, which are the percussion, and these green tracks down here are the strings, and then we've got a little bass line, which is here in the middle, which we're going to kind of ignore within the context of applying delay. What I'm interested to do is to see whether or not I can add some delay to the rhythmic parts within the percussion, just to make the kind of footprint of these sounds feel a bit bigger. Now, what I don't want to do is to compromise the rhythms that I've programmed here. I like the way that they're working within the piece. So anything I do here isn't designed to sort of add a sort of running series of notes that are going to dominate the mix, but just provide a little bit extra intensity really within these parts. So the first thing I'm going to do is to solo these 3 tracks. And in fact, I'm actually going to open Logic's mixer where I'll see those solo tracks are still soloed. And then what I'm going to do is to select all 3 of them, and I'm going to send them to the same auxiliary bus. I'm going to choose the first auxiliary which is available to me here, which is bus 2. And here what I'm going to have a chance to do as a result is to send all of these tracks the same amount to a new auxiliary bus, which is where I'm going to set up my first delay. I'm going to use Valhalla delay to configure this, and I'll just pop that down here. So what I'm going to have a chance to do here is to set up the delay that I want to use on this sound. Now, remember, I've got 3 separate percussion sources which are now going to be fed into this delay. So some of that's going to be low-end sort of percussive content, some of it's going to be more mid-range based. So I definitely want to make sure that anything I do from a delay perspective is in time with the track. I don't want to be making the definition of the rhythms compromised by having a delay which is out of time with the tune. So rather than using a millisecond option here, what I'm going to do instead is to choose a note-based delay. And what I'm going to do is to start with an 8th note on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, what I'm going to do is to choose a dotted 8th note. So what I've effectively got is a slightly different delay time for both channels of the mix here. Now, what that should mean when I press play is that we're going to hear the original sounds, and then what we're going to do via this auxiliary is to hear these 2 separate channels of delay. Now, because I've added this plugin on an auxiliary, I only need it to provide me with delay. The dry sound is coming from the the actual tracks themselves, and I just need the auxiliary to provide the delay. And what that means is I can turn the mix dial up to 100% because I don't need any dry signal coming from this delay here. The one thing I am going to do before I press play is just to slightly roll down the feedback. This is controlling the number of echoes. I don't want tons and tons of echoes complicating the rhythm. I just want to hear a little cluster of echoes before they die away so that I've mostly still got the rhythms that I programmed. So let's just press play and hear how that's enhancing the rhythm. What I'm actually going to do is to mute the return channel to start with, so we're just hearing the percussion, and then I'll unmute that track and we'll hear the delays being added. And when we get that final hit, you can hear that sort of extra sense of stereo that we get as a result of these delays. Now, why does it sound so stereo? Well, the reason for that is because I've chosen different delay times for the left and right channels. So what we've effectively got is every eighth note, which is more what the kind of pattern is programmed to do, is we've got this kind of repeating, undulating sense of that repeat on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, because we've got a dotted pattern, we get this slightly more syncopated, skippy kind of effect. And as a result of those two separate delays, we've got much more distinction between the left and the right channels. And that gives this kind of extra sense of stereo, which is often when we're composing for picture something that we want. We want something which is going to be big and widescreen and cinematic. So that's working well. And I like that treatment on these sounds. Now, what does it sound like if we also configure a delay stage for the strings? Again, we don't want to compromise the pattern that's being played, but what we might want to do is to bring some of this extra width, this extra sort of cinematic sense to those parts too. So let's unsolo, get rid of the solos on the percussion sounds, and we'll solo the strings instead. And to start with, what I'm going to do is to see what happens when I apply exactly the same delay treatment to the string parts. Now, what I'm going to do as a result of having soloed those is it makes it very easy for me to find these tracks within Logic's mixer. And again, to start with, what I'm going to do is just simply to send these through to bus 3 as well. Bus 2, which is where I've set up the delay. And just like with the percussion, because I've highlighted all of those tracks together, I can grab any of those send dials and all of those sends will be turned up by the same amount. So again, what I'm going to do is to press play, and we'll see how this string part is enhanced, hopefully enhanced by this delay treatment as well. Okay, so we can hear that delay treatment. Now, what we're also getting, particularly with these pitched instruments, is a much clearer sense of the wow and flutter settings which exist within this tape emulation. You can hear, particularly when I press stop, just those little pitch artifacts that are coming in. Now, I don't really want that on these strings. I like the kind of sort of precise, clear nature of these patterns and their pitch center. So if I don't want that effect, what I can do is to turn down the wow and flutter settings, and I can also get rid of the age dial here as well, turn that down to 0. And that gets rid of any of the kind of tape artifacts, some hiss, or some of the kind of characteristic tape effect that we get. So if you're wanting to kind of clean up a delay like this, then we can do that. Now, the way that delay is working is kind of okay on the strings, but it feels to me like it's getting in the way too much. I actually want slightly less delay, even though I like this kind of effect and the way that it's behaving is fine, but whereas it feels really good on the percussion, it feels like it's too much on the strings. So clearly what I can't do is to use exactly the same delay settings that I've used for the percussion. I can't use the same send. So what I'm actually going to do is to get rid of this treatment altogether, again because all of these tracks are highlighted. By getting rid of one of those auxiliary sends, they're all going to disappear. And what I'm going to do is just set up yet another auxiliary send. I'll put this on the one underneath so we can see the separation from bus 2 there and bus 3 here for the strings. And what I'm going to do is to turn up this send to a new auxiliary instead. I'm going to close this version of Valhalla delay, and I'm simply going to copy that one across to here. Now, so far, all I've done is to create exactly the same effect that I had before. Because those settings are going to be exactly the same, I haven't yet solved my problem. But really the problem that I've got is that I've got definitely too much feedback. I don't want those number of repeats. I want something which is much more like a kind of slapback echo. And I'm interested potentially to experiment with something shorter in the in the left-hand channel. So maybe what we might do would be to take this down to a 16th note and see what that does. So we've got a slightly different rhythmic sense of what's going on in terms of these echoes. Let's see how this feels. Okay, I like that quicker delay on the left. I'm also going to experiment just with coming down to a note value here rather than a dotted one, and we'll keep an 1/8 on the right. Again, because they're different, we're going to get that sense of these two separate discrete channels, but now both delays are a little bit faster. Yeah, I like that more. So we don't get the kind of same legacy that we've got with the percussion, because the feedback time is much less, or the feedback percentage is much less, and because those delay times are shorter as well. So again, what I'm going to do within the mix is I'm going to label these two auxiliaries. So that's the perc delay, the percussion delay, and this is obviously going to be the strings. And what we're going to do is to look at one more feature, which comes when you start adding delays to parts like this. The way that this track has been programmed is that we've got this very sort of hard stop at the beginning of bar 10. We've got a percussive hit, and we've got the track coming to an end right at the beginning of bar 10. And the only problem with adding delay is that what's going to happen is we're going to get that impact, and rather than the kind of hard stop that I've programmed there, instead we're going to get these echoes repeating. Let's just hear the end of the track like that. Okay, so what if I still want that hard stop that I've got in the programmed parts, and I don't want those echoes to continue at the end? Well, what I need to do, because these delays are coming from auxiliary channels, is I need to find a way to turn down the volume of those auxiliaries at that point. So we hear the delays up to that point, and at that point they stop dead. Well, that's easily done. What I'm going to do is to turn both of these auxiliary channels into automation read mode. And what that will do is to add both of them to my project. I'm going to grab both of those tracks and move them up to the top, so they're right up at the top of the display. And then what I can do is to come into automation mode and simply create a point, a bit of information where I want those delays to stop. So what I've done is to create a region at the beginning of bar 10. And in Logic, what I can do is to simply create automation points at the region borders. Now what that means is I've created nodes for the volume on these channels at the point where I've created that region. And that makes it very easy for me now just to click here and drag the volume down to 0. I don't need it to reset back up to full volume at the end. What that's done now is to give me this automation change where the volume is just going to drop. Remember, that's the volume not of the percussion or the strings themselves, but just of the delays on these auxiliaries. And what I can then do is to copy that down to the other auxiliary channel and make sure that I copy the automation data at the same time. Again, I'm not going to need this extra node that it's put in there. Now, what that should mean is that when we get to bar 10, these delays are now just going to stop dead, because these two auxiliary channels, their volume is going to drop to 0. So now I get that impact right at the end without those delays repeating. So what we've done within this chapter is to see that delays can be used as kind of pattern generators in musical contexts that aren't just based strictly within sort of pop and dance music fields. Here, what we've done is to make this kind of wider, more cinematic sound by creating delays both for percussion and for strings in this kind of a context. And what we've done is to look there right at the end at a mix technique, which is going to allow us to preserve really hitting individual points within maybe a cue or a picture that you're working to make sure that the delays don't provide this legacy that you don't want.